like it's unscripted, so just jump in any time, boys.
Sorry, did I miss my cue again? Yeah, look, I saw Dave a couple of weeks ago as well, and interestingly, I went with a bloke called Peter Fox, who, as many of you may know, was the New South Wales police whistleblower. In fact, he's known as the last honest man within the New South Wales Police Department, and I think he's possibly the only honest man in their history. He was a detective who blew the whistle on the institutional child abuse about the Catholic Church covering up, and he was basically the catalyst for the Child Abuse Royal Commission. Peter and I went to see Dave, and he was very happy to see us because we don't ask him the dreaded question, if you had your time again, would you do the same thing again? Because we know why he did it, and we don't have to ask that question. And before that, I was down with Troy, and David said, it's great to see us because he knows that we get it. We know what he did and why he did it. And it's significant that every whistleblower in Australia that I know supports Dave, and others have been down as well. Kent Quinlan flew down from Queensland to support Dave at one of his hearings, or two of them possibly. And he would have been here tonight, except, and here's a bit of a trend, isn't it? Kent's in court. Kent, Shell Energy whistleblower in Queensland's in court on Monday against the Shell Energy Corporation. So a hearing was called on, and so that's the only reason he isn't here with us. And all the other whistleblowers, there's an association called Whistleblowers Australia. To a man and woman, we all support Dave because we all know. And our stories differ in terms of settings and details, but the fundamental essence of our stories are all the same. There's always the original sin, normally by some low-level flunkies take the fall for that, be they bank tellers or corporals in the SAS, while the bank bosses and the generals pretend they didn't know anything about it. So we all get that, we've seen it all, we've been through it ourselves. We understand the retaliation, we understand the viciousness, we understand how institutions, including the corrupt Albanese government, which personally I think is the most corrupt government this country's ever had, and which I despise even more than the alternative corrupt Dutton government, because I think at least Dutton is a nasty thug who doesn't pretend to be anything else, whereas Albo tries to pretend to be your friend and then stabs you in the back. So Dave's taken on the Australian government, he's threatening to expose their cover-up. And Jesus Christ, the banks spent decades ripping customers off before I came along and decided to do something about it. War crimes in Afghanistan, when was the first one, Eddie? Was it 2006?
Well, I know there was a terrible one in 2009 where 5 children's throats were slit and certain soldiers were told where they had to bury the bodies. That's going to come out at some point soon, I think.
Yeah, and I think they went on to 2013. And even the Brereton report, even Major General Brereton, who was a safe pair of hands, who'd been brought in to do a report to whitewash his fellow generals, even Brereton couldn't disguise the fact that these war crimes have been going on for over 5 years. Now, Blind Freddie knows not even the pathetic generals that ran our army could possibly have not known what was going on for 5 years.
And when we talk about General Brereton, what people don't actually know is that he is the first person that David McBride contacted back in 2013, late 2013, early 2014, before he made a complaint. He rang him because he knew him, because General Brereton was his dad, William McBride's lawyer, when his dad went to get back his medical licence after the second medication that he blew the whistle on. And so General Brereton knew exactly what was going on back then, and he encouraged David to make a complaint. And that's what he did, complaining internally then complaining to the AFP, he complained to the Minister for Defence, he complained to the Attorney General, he complained to every single person you could possibly complain to, and every single one of them shut them down. David McBride's case isn't just about some illegal investigations of soldiers. His complaint goes to the very heart of the rotten core of the ADF. Now, he's learnt a lot over the last 12 years and travelled a long path of exploring and finding out more and more. But the first thing, and I think it's really important for supporters to really understand the case of David McBride, the very first thing that happened was when David McBride was sitting in his office in Bungendore down the road here, and he was told that the rules of engagement were about to be suddenly changed. This is the end of 2013, and the beginning of end of 2012, beginning of 2013. Now we know what happened in 2012. Many unlawful killings, many of them that were reported in the Brereton report. David McBride was an expert in the rules of engagement. He taught soldiers it, he wrote papers on it. He didn't see a need to change the rules of engagement and said to his higher-ups, well, perhaps some soldiers need to be retrained in them because they're actually quite restrictive. And they said, no, we really need to change them. And he asked why, and they gave him a few reports from a few incidents that happened the year before. But those reports, everyone was cleared. Everyone said that they all complied with the rules of engagement. So you can imagine David McBride is just starting to scratch his head going, what's going on here? And so they said, oh, we got legal advice as well. And they reluctantly gave him the legal advice from DFAT and the Attorney General's Department. And that legal advice said that, well, actually the rules of engagement that are there now probably don't quite comply with international law. They're a little bit too restricted, but we understand caution is needed to make sure that soldiers don't step over the line and unlawfully kill anyone. But these new ones, David McBride said, were going to put soldiers' lives in danger. And that's what he was very concerned about, that they could be charged with murder when they were acting lawfully. And then after that, the investigative agency attached to the ADF, ADFIS, started flying over whenever there was a fatality in Afghanistan. When there was no reasonable suspicion to launch a murder investigation was launched. As a lawyer, David McBride said, no, we have rules, we have the rule of law. You can't investigate people without having a reasonable basis for doing that. It was terrorising some of the soldiers. They had to go through over a year of this hanging over their head, all cleared. But what we know now is in 2012, the Ben Roberts-Smith matters, the Oliver Schultz matters, and it's been David's position and my position as well that this has been a cover-up, that all of a sudden they started investigating, all of a sudden they're changing the rules of engagement, and still to this day, no one who's responsible for those unlawful killings has been put in jail, just David McBride.
Shame.
It's always a case in this country, it's become a norm for government to go after the whistleblower and let's see where they've fucked up. They've obviously made some sort of mistake, we can get them on, and let's ignore the substantive issue that they've reported. And in my case, Jeff's case, Peter Fox's case, it's all the same playbook that the government use, whether it be, an ADF, a Commonwealth Bank, or the gambling industry. So the government's owned at all the tiers, unfortunately, and I was hoping to get up to Jeff's level and Peter Fox's, maybe a Royal Commission, but once again a Labor Premier, Chris Minns, he decided there was no need to further investigate anything about money laundering in clubs, and here we are 5 years on down the track and he keeps kicking it down the road.
Of course.
Massive losses for problem gamblers. I think 6 billion in the last quarter of last year. It keeps going up, and the agencies like Austrac, AFP, they're all walking around with blinkers. At least, when you go to Bankstown pacing track, the blinkers are good on the, on the horses running around. That's where they should be left. But Parliament House, blinkers galore. So it's really, really frustrating that all of us, you know, when we get together, we've got the same theme, the same issues, different walks of life. So how we break that cycle, I think, is people power, and we just keep pushing the narrative, and hopefully we can get some media to jump on board, and they seem to be hiding the mainstream media most of the time.
Yep.
As we sit here, so.
Troy, should I share a bit of whistleblower law with the audience?
Yeah, please, Jeff.
I'm going to let you in on a little inside secret. In Whistleblowers Australia, we don't have a lot of money for expensive consultants or anything to draw up sort of award schemes or anything. So, are you familiar with that soap company Amway? Well, we just copied them. So, to get to the highest level of achievement within Whistleblowers Australia, it's what's known as being a double diamond, like in Amway. And to achieve that level of excellence, you have to qualify, you have to get a Royal Commission. So Peter Fox and I are at the double diamond level. And Troy, and it's early days yet, mate. I mean, you're only 5 years in it. It took me 9 years to get there to get a Royal Commission. And David is also in the running. And Peter, Troy and David and myself, we have a few lunches up at Brooklyn, north of Sydney. We go to a little, the Angler's Arms or the Brooklands Arms pub, and we get some fish and chips there, the four of us. And the last one was just before David faced sentencing. And it's just amazing. We all kind of recognised each other as the same sort of personalities, having had the same experience. It was because whistleblowers don't know any better. They all think they're the only ones to go through this until they meet other whistleblowers. And Peter and I recognised that both Troy and David are really in the running to achieve that double diamond distinction. Troy, interestingly, like, we don't think about it. This is the trouble. People don't think about these things, but like the human misery involved in poker machines and gambling. Some of these clubs have got 700 poker machines in them. Some poor bastards, they're addicted to it. They're gambling away their homes, their kids' futures. It's just awful. And there's only one bloke who saw anything wrong with that, and that's Troy. And David is threatening to bring down the House on, as I say, these corrupt governments. And the alternatives are Albanese government or Dutton government. And they are both running scared of David. And I think we all need to understand that the reason why they've gone so hard against him is because of the threat he poses. And because the crooked generals who, you know, when they weren't too busy running around awarding each other medals for distinguished leadership in Afghanistan, even though they tell General Brereton, who's inclined to believe them, that they had absolutely no idea what was going on. That's what qualifies as distinguished leadership these days. I'm sure there's a lot of Anzacs turning in their graves. They weren't the only ones involved in this. The defence ministers and the prime ministers, if you look at that through that period, there's no way known they didn't know about it, because at the end of the day, it's the old Jack Nicholson theory that people can't handle the truth. So they're all implicated in this cover-up. And it's another little principle of whistleblowers that the cover-up is always worse than the crime.
Yeah.
And the man who threatens the cover-up here with all the crooked generals, defence ministers, prime ministers from both of the two major corruption parties. I mean, let's face it, it's not as if we've got a choice. The man who threatens that is David McBride. So can you imagine the fury? I mean, Troy and I know what it's like when institutions turn on you. But the fury of the Australian government that this man, and why did he have to do it? Everybody else was prepared to go along with it. He stood up and he still threatens to expose them. And that's the battle we're facing. And I'll say something that Eddie, as an admitted solicitor, can't say. Which is, tomorrow, as we were before, we're in the hands of the court system. And I'll give a shout out to Nick Xenophon up the back at this point. Nick, like and I don't think either of them will mind me mentioning this, Nick and Troy are both battling cancer, as is Kent Quinlan in Queensland. That doesn't stop him flying down here to support David. It doesn't stop Troy driving down here on several occasions to support David, 7 hours from where he lives. And it didn't stop Nick flying up from Adelaide to support David. But Nick Xenophon said something many years ago, which I've only ever seen more and more vindication for as the years go past, which is we have a legal system, not a justice system. Now, in this country, justice goes to the people who can afford to pay for it. And God, in my career in banking, which goes back to 1985, there's one invariable rule, which is the little guy who takes on the big institution gets pulverised in court. He runs out of money, eventually he loses everything. There's no justice in our legal system. But what's even worse is when you're taking on the government. Because, and again, there's this thing that apparently exists in theory called separation of powers, does not exist in reality. I mean, courts are actually meant to be separate from the government. But who appoints the judges? In America, it's Donald Trump. So when Donald Trump was last president, he stacked the US Supreme Court with judges who reckon that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision. In Australia, it's exactly the same. Liberal and Labor governments stack all the courts with their own little flunkies and cronies, little party men, anybody with a law degree, whose knuckles don't obviously drag on the ground, they can wind up on the court bench. And every judge on the court bench owes his appointment to a state or a federal government. Think about that for a moment. They owe their jobs. Now, if you've got a Supreme Court judge at a state level, every one of them aspires to be perhaps on the Court of Appeal. And beyond that, maybe the federal court or the High Court. Now, the only people who can make that happen for them are the governments. And the only governments that we've had to date are Liberal and Labor. So when a bloke like David McBride goes along to the Supreme Court, the government's got a lot of interest, had a lot of interest in his case, but it's got a lot of control and a lot of influence with whatever judge is here in that case. So separation of powers exists in theory, but in reality, and this really came home to me in my own battle. There's a club, there's an oligarchy. What I saw for years, governments of both stripes would protect the banks, protect their friends. And let's face it, when a politician finally has one scandal too many and he leaves politics to spend more time with his family, he's looking for a nice comfortable gig with a bank somewhere like Gladys Berejiklian, for example, found to be corrupt by the New South Wales ICAC, currently holding down a job with Optus. Optus doesn't see a problem with employing as a senior executive somebody found to be corrupt. So even that's no barrier to employment. And the banks have a lot of jobs to give out to their old mates. And they pump a lot of money into election funding. So the banks could pretty much control the outcome. Troy's case is interesting. And this is, again, it's the same sort of thing that's happening with David. Troy took on Clubs New South Wales, which was just meant to be some sort of umbrella organisation for New South Wales clubs. But they sit down with the Liberal and Labor parties before each state election and they put a piece of paper in front of them. Do you remember the Godfather movie where, Luca Brasi made this person an offer they couldn't refuse? They put a piece of paper down in front of them and they tell them that either their signature or their brains is going to be on that contract. Well, it's the same. Clubs New South Wales puts a memorandum of understanding down in front of Liberal and Labor before each state election and says, sign here. Now, they donate, through the individual clubs and the umbrella organisations, they donate a lot of money each year. So guess what? they both sign. And so when someone like Troy proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that we need, for example, a cashless gambling card to at least reduce the incidence of problem gambling and money laundering, Chris Minns calls for a trial and then nothing happens. The Albanese government has had a report saying gambling is unambiguously bad, we should have a total gambling ban. So Albo's just sitting on that till after the election. You know, the Albanese government won't do anything. They can't do anything because they're going to lose election funding. They're going to lose donations. I mean, this system is just entrenched and it permeates everything, including the court system. So tomorrow the odds are stacked. To be frank with you all, my personal view is the odds are stacked against David, as they have been all along. But if the justice system fails us again, as they did last time, we will be going to the High Court. And we just have to hope that at some point there are senior judges who, when push comes to shove, will say, no, we can't wear that. But no matter what happens, we will keep going. And I personally think, in part, David is a huge factor. David McBride is a huge factor, and I think he will be a huge factor in ending the two-party system of government in this country. The corruption is now so prevalent, people are aware of it, and in this forthcoming election, I hope and believe that we will not see another majority government. And that is the best way we can help David McBride, is work towards bringing down these two parties, because they have worked together to put David McBride behind bars. So the way we get him out of prison, the way we get him vindicated, is to bring down the two-party system.
Can I just add another thing, which everyone here, we're talking to a crowd of wonderful sycophants here really, but what I've noticed about every whistleblower that I have met, another parallel, is that they're all just doing their job and doing it really well, and not bowing down when they're told to be quiet or don't make a scene or whatever. They've kept standing. Like, that's why these guys are heroes, and Dave McBride is a hero. No matter how many times they have been psychologically bammed down with psych reports, dirt units, rumours, gossip, the whole arms of government against them in courts, millions of dollars spent, they're still standing. And I think that's pretty remarkable. But I think what I've learnt, and I think I've done it most of my life, is that don't be a bystander. That is how all evil is done, is when people don't stand up and say something. It's why David has been on this lonely path for so long, because everyone around him just put up with it and didn't say anything. That's why it's been a lonely journey for Jeff and Troy, is because people are just standing by and saying and doing nothing. Now tomorrow, I've actually got a little bit more hope in my heart than Jeff, but anyway. We've got 3 judges tomorrow, and we're running, it's called an all grounds appeal, where we're saying that the sentence was too severe, and we're saying that the conviction should be overturned. So if we win the conviction appeal, it goes back to a new trial. And in the interim, we'll be saying to the Commonwealth prosecution, knock it off, don't retry him, don't waste another $3 million of taxpayers' money prosecuting this man who's just done 10 hard months in jail, who's got a daughter in year 12 he wants to support right now. Enough is enough, and I would hope that they would be sensible and consider carefully withdrawing the prosecution. So that's the goal. We are realistic about our expectations. David has always said, and I agree, this is a matter for the High Court. Sadly, we have seen our courts become politicised, and that's why I say his case is so important for everyone to be talking about and telling everyone about, is because it really has shown the breakdown of the separation of powers that Jeff spoke about. Because in this case of Dave McBride, and that's why it's not just about him, it's about all of us and our freedoms to speak. It's about the bedrock of democracy. How could it be that in this case, we saw the Attorney General swoop into the court with a superpower and remove evidence from the judge? Remove the evidence from the judge. That is an absolute compromise of the separation of powers. When we have no court to go to turn to, when the government has overreached in their law or the executive has overreached in implementing their law, if we don't have the courts to turn to, if there's no accountability for government, we are not living in a democracy, we are living in an autocracy. And it's a very, very slippery slope. And David McBride's case illustrates that perfectly. And that is why everyone should be sitting up and paying attention, because we are seeing our freedoms slip away very, very quickly. So that's why his case is important, and we've got to just stand with David until the end and talk to as many people as possible. Don't believe everything you read in the media. I'm always available to talk to people if they want to know what the case is about. We've got to stand by David tomorrow. We're going to give him a lot of support in court. We're not going to misbehave. We're going to trust that the judiciary is what it is meant to be and that it's there to administer justice. And then if it doesn't, whatever, do what you need to do. But for the moment, let's just all, just be there and give David really, really, really big smiles. I think we've got some good prospects of succeeding in the severity appeal. Clearly, it was a sentence that was excessive. Clearly, they should have at least given him an intensive corrections order. You don't shove a 61-year-old war veteran with PTSD, major depressive disorder, with children still going through high school, little risk of reoffending to the community ever again, little risk of reoffending. You don't put someone like that in jail. You give them the opportunity of a community-based term of imprisonment, which is what an ICO. So we think Mossop just did not consider that properly, and he didn't consider a lot of different matters that you'll hear tomorrow. I don't know how it's going to go tomorrow, but when we get there, we've already filed a huge amount of material with the court. So the 3 judges, they're all female, and they would have read everything. And so usually at that level of court, they come in with very pointed questions. They just want to go straight to the crux of the issue. And so they might just ask a few questions and it might just be over quite quickly. Then they'll reserve judgment, I don't know how long for. Someone in Dave's pod at the moment is waiting 12 months for judgment. Yeah, 12 months. So let's all talk about that in the media so we can make sure that the judiciary know that we're waiting. We want this decision expedited. He's 10 months in jail tomorrow. And so, let's hope we can get him out as soon as possible.
I think we got to see continuing on from Jeff and Eddie, we got to see how angry Mossop was in that chair. I've spent a bit of time in the federal court with my matter, and he was angry, and the only thing I could put it down to, David must have slept with his wife. That's how angry Mossop was. Absolutely crazy.
Well, somebody had to, Troy.
Yeah.
Because what David was doing his job as a lawyer and going, hang on, you can't apply the law differently in 2 different situations. You can't prosecute these people with no reasonable suspicion and then completely ignore people who are clearly got blood on their hands. No, you can't do that. That's your job as a lawyer, to actually stand up and say, hey, rule of law is something, we all must be equal before the law, and that's not happening. That's what David McBride was complaining about. But the cover-up has been humongous, because we've seen those same soldiers who were responsible for so many unlawful killings being awarded medal after medal after medal since then. And both governments are involved in this cover-up. So there's a lot to lose here, and that's why they're being so intense in the prosecution of David McBride, because he knows that. And if what he was touching was going to it's like a Watergate. I really believe it's like a Watergate. It would just bring the house of cards down, and they don't want that. And I think that we should be, really getting our forces together, okay, and calling for a royal commission into the entire Afghanistan war. Don't you think? The entire war that was built on a lie.
Double diamond, here we come.
Here we come.
It's no mistake or how you look at it. Brereton's done exactly the same thing with robo-debt in his role at the NAC. And have a guess who the person was. I reported all the money laundering in clubs to Nicole Rose, who was the CEO of Austrac at the time, who's now one of the deputies under Brereton. There's no conspiracy. They've been handpicked to do as they're told. And obviously any whistleblower, they expect the acronym STF shut up.
So I think we're going to get moved off the stage,
No,
but do we want...
No,
Yeah.
just gonna say, can you maybe ask for questions?
Questions,
Well-
Q&A. We're moving into the Q&A session now.
All right. Yeah, no, I'll say it later.
Anyone got a question?
Oh my
We're all
God,
informal,
we've stunned them all into silence.
Just takes one.
Here we go.
person. Hey, in the front row. It's Kathy Vogan, who has been reporting amazing for us with Consortium News with Joe Laurier there. Thank you guys for standing by. Independent media. Michael West was going to come tonight. He's going to try and come down. He's been sued. You know, he's just up against it as well. They just want to crush anyone that's not mainstream. Anyway, Kathy.
Hasn't Kathy recently been awarded the Troublemakers Medal of Freedom?
Indeed, she has.
I think we should recognise that.
Congratulations, Kathy.
A very simple question. Just tell us a bit more about these three judges.
Okay, turn your phones off, all right?
Okay, Kathy, you've got to turn the camera off at this stage.
Is the room soundproofed?
Yeah, bulletproof, I mean.
Names.
Never